Welcome back here to City Slicker Builds. This episode is all about doing a Sears Roto-Spader 917 251880 repower project. It originally had a Briggs and Stratton 8 horsepower engine on it that was shot, so it was not a direct bolt up to put a Harbor Freight Predator 6.5 horsepower engine on it. So I filmed how I did it, so everybody else that has one out there can do it. It's actually not that bad. It just takes a little bit of time. So please watch the episode and see how this thing turned out. Okay, as you can see here, the Predator 6.5 horsepower is all mounted up. Using all the stock mounting materials and everything. Just had to do a little bit of modifications just to prove that it is a Predator 6.5 horsepower 212cc engine. As you can see, I've got it lifted up here on the jack to test run it. As of right now, my Sears tractor that I have that this is going on is non-running, but I just got a heck of a deal on this project and I knew it wouldn't take too long. So I wanted to tackle this first. So as you can see here, the Predator is all bolted up. Let me come over here so you guys can see the model number. It is model number 917.251880. In some of the other video I have shot, going through some basic maintenance about adding a little bit of oil to the transmission there. I'm calling it a transmission for the tiller. And greasing everything so it runs smooth. I love this Predator, cranks on the first pull. Runs nice and quiet, so I think this is going to be a nice addition of attachments to have for my Suburban. So let's dive in it, and I will show you how I mounted everything up and made everything so it works out with the measurements and everything. Not too bad to do. Could probably have it done in a weekend. So if you're getting ready to put in your crops, put in a garden or whatever with this little roto tiller, if you have one similar, it's not that bad of a project. The cost wasn't that bad either. The cost was about $140. The engine ran me $100. I did have to use or buy a crankshaft sleeve for it to go from 3/4 to 1 inch because I used a stock double pulley. And then about $20 in hardware for the bolts for the engine brackets and all that fun stuff. I paid $50 for the tiller and then gave the guy an additional $25 to meet me a little bit closer so I didn't have to drive so far. So this project, I really don't have that much money into it and it's going to be really nice. All right, as you can see here, we've got the engine removed. I already cleaned it up a little bit. I do plan on taking this completely apart to paint it up and so it doesn't rust and all that stuff. So if you guys are looking at it and going, God, he could have done a better job. I just want to clean it up, get most of that goop off of there. And then I do plan on taking it apart and painting everything up all nice. So here's what it looks like without the engine. So let's go ahead and drop in the new Predator and see how things bolt up and go from there. Okay, as you can see here with the engine mocked up, let me show you the back side first. We are perfectly fine matching up on those bolt holes for the engine mount. But the front is too long from the old Briggs and Stratton. So obviously we're going to have to drill it out and put new bolts in there to be able to mount the engine. So here's the other issue now. Is I took the pulley off of the old engine and see how we're out of a line there. So we're actually going to have to slide the whole engine over. So what I'm going to do is now take this mount off, which the engine mount, which includes this piece here, you know, for the 3-point and all the way over to here to these sides, which sucks having to take more of this thing apart just to be able to re-drill out those holes and put new bolts in to get the pulleys lined up. So that is the next step on this thing. I have already flipped it over and pulled these bolts loose and then realizing, you know, not paying attention before that this is attached to this, so that all this has to come apart. So I got to get that all off. But now I'm going to pull those bolts, then kind of re-put it back together with minus these bolts so I can slide it over, get everything lined up, and make sure everything fits. Okay, the engine didn't bolt up, so what I have done is I flipped it over so that way, bear with me getting my mic cord wrapped up, I can take the top engine bracket mount off. It's going to be that bolt there, that one there, and then 2 in the rear, so I can re-drill it out for new bolt holes for the motor. So let me get this off here and I will show you the next step. I lost some of the video that I shot when I was going through this. I had some technical difficulties, so let's go over some of the things that I had lost so you guys have the dimensions and everything of what I had built. So you can see here, this is a bracket you will need to build to be able to mount the original belt tensioner system to the Predator engine. As you can see, I just used actually a Coke Zero, of all things, cardboard box to make this template. So with this template here, this length going across here is 6 inches by 4 inches, and here is the bolt pattern. The distance between these two is 2 19/32 is what I measured for mine. Now you can see that I have the clutch bracket already cut out, drilled out, and mounted to the new Predator. So now here is the clutch bracket. Still, I mounted it back onto the Briggs to show you guys. So we have to get that now mounted onto that plate. Before, I had actually already did this, and I wish I hadn't until I videoed. There's a little tab here that went inside that hole there to help hold this in place. And I had already cut that off with my grinder before I videoed. I'm sorry again that I did that. So what my thought process is here is to drill out within here and use 3 holes here because we have spacing next behind the block there. So I'm gonna have the heads on the back side with the studs sticking out to bolt that to, with enough room for that to swing in there. So of course, now we got to measure and trying to get everything lined up to about those specs that are on this Briggs onto this plate. Okay, now we've got the clutch assembly all bolted up here on the engine. What I ended up having to do with it to get everything to fit, let me see if I can get this out of the way. Sorry for that, is I had to trim down the stock bracket so that my bolts could go in between the two up there. And then I could probably take a little bit more out for the clearance I have between that bolt. The reason I offset those 2 bolts bolting the clutch to the engine bracket is so that we'd have clearance when this throw arm here gets thrown. So let me walk around here, see if I can get a good visual of how everything clears. So it's going to get pushed just like that. So see if we came down low down here with a bolt for extra reinforcement, we would end up hitting it there. So, and then from the old Briggs, I tried to get this lined up as center as possible. I think that's going to be okay. We're just a smidge it off. But the gap here from the edge of the clutch arm to the crankshaft is 5/16. So long as we're able to maintain that while it's hanging free like that, we should be good. As you can tell, the stock pulley, I don't know where it is at this second, it is a 1-inch crankshaft bore hole in the center. So I ordered off of Amazon, I think it was $20. I'll put links and whatnot in the video of a crankshaft sleeve. And it's going to be 3 inches, so it's going to extend it a little bit, which will help out because as you can see here, we do need it to stick out a little bit further so that way it will go to the pulley to the transmission that turns the tines. So next up that we have to do on this build is to come up with a way to mount the engine. I've just got that 1x1 pipe in there now, just setting there so I can put the engine on and off real quick and easy. So I've got to figure out the best way so that everything pulls off so you can take this thing apart to work on it when need be. So that is going to be the next step in this process. Okay, at this point I have the engine mounted to my 1x1 by 1/8 inch square tubing. I'm not going to give you guys the measurements on that, as every engine could be drilled a little bit differently, because I was looking at my schematics from the engine paperwork and they actually drilled mine differently. So please measure yours yourself and drill them out and mount it on there. I'll show you mine. I mounted mine by cutting out slots in the bottom to be able to put 1.5 inch 5/16 bolts in there with nylon lock nuts for the front and the back. So now we have the engine sitting on here. I went ahead and took my level here that you can see and made sure that the pulleys are lined up. So I will run it across here. Hopefully you can see that everything is sitting in line. And then I'm also taking my ruler here and making sure that we are, about as center as possible on there to this pulley line of being 11 inches. I think we got a little bit of wiggle room there because we are using belts, belt stretch, and all that fun stuff. So now at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill out my new engine spacers on each side on the back and go right down through the plate, and then same thing for the front on each side. Now coming over to the pull start side, the housing here is pretty tight. So what I'll probably end up doing, instead of dropping the bolt down through here, is bringing it up through the bottom and putting the nut on the top side there. But everything else looks like I should be able to run through the top down to the bottom of the plate. So that is going to be the next step that I do. Got the engine bolted up to our 1x1 by 1/8 inch spacers that I am using. As you can see here, I notched out the bottom side so I could get the bolts in there and put the nuts on. And then I drilled out the sides there, and I will show you on the tiller mount how all that is. As you can see, did the same thing back here. So now let's walk over to the tiller. And sorry, it's still a little wet. I just pressure washed this thing to get it cleaned up. My 1x1 fits directly across here, and I drilled out my hole here. So as you can see, it clears the transmission itself, so I can bolt all the way straight through. So I got it on each side there, and then coming up to the front. One thing to keep in mind is you do have this throw arm here that's going to be in the way. So the way mine actually worked out is with that 1x1 is it fit perfectly up against here to get that 11 inches from center of crankshaft to the pulley there. So as you can see, just drilled that out. I can run my bolts completely through. So as I just said, that I pressure washed this thing to get it cleaned up. Maybe it looks a little different to you guys, got all the mud and stuff off. I went ahead and threw grease in the fittings here, just pumped a whole bunch into there. Got one on this side and then one on this side. Figure it's going to be easiest to do this now. And then here is the transmission plug here. Reading the instructions on this unit is you should never have to change the oil, but you should check it periodically and cap it off where the oil is just below the plug here. Mine was severely dry. I had to put oil in it, and I believe it calls for 1.4 quarts of SW30. I'm in Ohio, so I'm just using 10W30 in mine. So now what I will do is I will get this all bolted back together and then get it fired up for you guys to show this thing running.